Hi, in this lesson we're going to consider central poetic images of Seamus Heaney's Strange Fruit. We're going to explore the intertextual reference that's in the title. We'll study how precise meaning is crafted in literary language. We'll look at how he uses the pronouns to structure and shift the focus. Then we'll look at the use of any cultural connotations, deconstruct and understand the significance of recounting, before coming to a conclusion about the creation of the poetic voice and viewpoint. Before we start, I want you to consider the word fruit and what the connotations of fruit can be. Have a look at each of these images and think about what they suggest to you. In our culture, things are suggested through cherries, apples, figs. In traditional art, the use of fruit has often been symbolic. So if you see a painting of the Madonna, she may often hold a pomegranate to suggest that she's also fertile. Or in the biblical story of the fall, you see the forbidden fruit and the consequences of transgression. And again, we see pomegranates in Renaissance art and figs to suggest fertility and sensuality. Strange Fruit is another bog poem by Seamus Heaney, but by taking the title, he's not just calling some aspect of the fruit strange, he's also making a cultural reference to a well-known text, a song called Strange Fruit, and we're going to explore that now. By making a direct reference to Strange Fruit, the song, Heaney is bringing to If you look at this picture showing a map of the states and the number of lynchings that were concentrated in the South but were used throughout the United States from 1882 to 1968, Heaney is writing and drawing on references to strange fruit hanging in the trees from a contemporary setting on a global situation. But by using that title, he's showing that in the past, people were also killed unjustly and hung in trees, like the strange fruit that we see here. The illegal lynching of people is not a form of justice or punishment. It is a form of terror to instill fear and to exert power over a subjugated people. And that is what we see also in the poem. Strange fruit. Here is the girl's head, like an exhumed gourd, oval-faced, prune-skinned, prune-stones for teeth. They unswaddled the wet fern of her hair and made an exhibition of its coil. Let the air at her leathery beauty, Pash of tallow, perishable treasure. Her broken nose is dark as turf clod, her eyeholes blank as pools in the old workings. Diodorus Siculus confessed his gradual ease among the likes of this. Murdered, forgotten, nameless, terrible beheaded girl, outstaring axe and beatification, outstaring what had begun to feel like reverence. In the poem, Heaney asks us to consider the head of the girl, which he likens to an exhumed gourd. Now, if you look at the pictures, you can see the gourds growing naturally on the right in strange, interesting shapes. But these gourds were often used practically, hollowed out, dried out, and turned into domestic utensils, as on the left. By using this image, Heaney is asking us to consider this girl, this woman, an exhumed gourd, something used for domestic social purposes. As the poem develops, we're asked to consider who she is and how she's been treated. And by the end, there is a very uneasy tension between how we consider her and how Heaney himself is looking at her and what she has become. If we look closely at the language in Strange Fruit, I'm going to start by looking at the pronouns. The deictic pronoun here, this, point to the situation. Here is the girl's head. But by the end, she has been objectified with the pronoun this. We'll come back to that word at the end because it has another meaning. These simple words place us in the position, and they ask us to contemplate the looking at the strange fruit or the dead girl. We see her then listed in simple nouns: a head, teeth, tallow, nose, eyeholes. She's listed as a series of objects and there for us to observe. Simplistic, the remnants of a body. If you then look at the pronouns, they unswaddled the wet fern of her hair, her leathery beauty, her broken nose, her eyeholes. There's a slight uneasiness about what they have done to her. She is given the feminine pronoun there, which gives her some sense of worth as a being, but she has been objectified. We move on and we look at the situation there. There is no reference in this poem to Heaney. He doesn't use the first person pronoun here. So where is he in this? Is he just describing them here, those people there, and what they've done to her? Unusually, he refers to the Greek scholar Diodorus Siculus. he makes a comparison with him as if he is like him but unlike him, and suggests that we are positioned like him. Diodorus Siculus confessed his gradual ease among the likes of this ancient Greek scholar who was around the dead so much that he became desensitized to the dead. Is Heaney suggesting that we look at her not as a dead woman killed in some way, but as an object of historical artifact? The imagery and the connotations unpack this idea. If you look at the pale blue highlighting, he uses a simile to show that she's like an exhumed gourd, just a daily object, a thing. She's oval-faced, prune-skinned, prune-stones for teeth. The two compound adjectives define her and shape her, but then the compound noun, prune-stones for teeth, devalues her. She's become a thing. They unswaddled the wet fern of her hair. Unswaddling is a metaphor here for unwrapping. Interestingly, swaddling is associated with babies. We swaddle babies, we wrap them up and protect them and value them. She is unswaddled. She is a child, a young girl. And yet the wet fern of her hair, that metaphor there, fern, is delicate, sensitive. Heaney has a sympathy for this girl. She has just been made an exhibition of, and made an exhibition of its coil. She's just a thing again. They've let the air get her at her leathery beauty. So you've got that sense of beauty, yes, but it's leathery, it's preserved, and the air is potentially destructive and will destroy her. Similarly, we've got the Pash of tallow and the perishable treasure. He values her, sees her beauty in the image of the treasure, but the tallow is fat, and the Pash is a violent, crushing blow. Something has destroyed her, whether in putting her in the ground or in digging her out of the ground. She has been abused. Her broken nose is dark as a turf clod. That simile, a turf clod. She's just mud. She's become like the earth. And we see again this dispassionate image devaluing her. Similarly, her eyeholes are blank as pools in the old workings. There's nothing there. She's not alive. But he imagines there, by looking at her eyes, he sees her as something that is lost. The identity, the soul of her eyes gone. The old workings that no longer work. At the end of the stanza, Heaney moves back to the pronoun this. The likes of this. A very dismissive pronoun. But is it the process, this? Is it the process of looking at devaluing people that we're being asked to look at? Is it the this object, the actual artifact, the body that's been dug up? Both of those have significance. But Heaney moves towards the girl. He describes her now as murdered, forgotten, nameless, terrible, beheaded. A list of adjectives to give her some sense of respect as a victim. And then he does more than that. He looks closely at the girl and he looks at what she is doing, or what he imagines she's doing, and repeats it twice, outstaring. She's outstaring the axe that beheaded her. She has survived. She is here today for us to know. She did not disappear into nothingness. There she is. And she outstares us, both Heaney at the place, the scientists who've packaged her and objectified her, and us also as the subject matter of the poem. She is outstaring us. She resists beatification, the process of becoming a saint. Heaney, by using her as an object for his poem, is guilty of taking her and mythologizing her, turning her into some saint. But he resists that now at the end by recognizing it has become too reverential. The Ede girl was a bog body found in the village of Ede in the Netherlands. She was found on the 12th of May 1897 and was reputedly uncannily well preserved when discovered, especially her hair. But by the time the body was turned over to the authorities, a fortnight later, it had been severely damaged and deteriorated. Most of her teeth had been pulled from the skull by villagers, as well as a large amount of hair. The peat cutting tools had also been reported to have severely damaged the body. Carbon-14 tests have indicated that the Ede girl died between 54 BCE and 128 CE at an approximate age of 16 years. She had long reddish blonde hair, but one side of her head was initially thought to have been shaved before she died. Recent studies, however, have indicated that the shaved hair phenomenon in some bodies may simply attest to the one side of the head being exposed to oxygen slightly longer than the others. Scans have shown that she suffered from scoliosis. She stood at 137 centimeters, which is comparatively small for a 16-year-old. The body was found clad in a woolen cape and with a woolen band, made its braiding technique known as sprang, wrapped around the neck, suggesting she was executed or sacrificed. There was also a stab wound in the area of her collarbone, but that was not determined as the cause of death. It is thought that she may have died while unconscious, as defensive wounds were absent on the hand that was recovered from the body, unlike a similar case in Germany, where a boy had a cut on his left hand from an apparent defense attempt. As with most bog bodies, the skin and features are still preserved because of the tannic acid in the marsh water. When the Ede girl was excavated, the diggers accidentally caused a wound to the skull. Only the torso of the girl, the head, the right hand and the feet remain intact today. The rest of her was not preserved or had been damaged by peat cutting tools. Diodorus Siculus was a Greek historian. He is known for his monumental universal history, the Bibliotheca Historia, much of which survives. The books cover the destruction of Troy and regions from Egypt, India and Arabia to Greece and Europe. Later he went on to write about the Trojan War and the death of Alexander the Great. He worked as a battlefield surgeon, and in one of his memoirs he confessed that after being exposed to dead bodies for long periods of time, he became indifferent and at ease in the face of death. This idea is what Heaney draws on, that we look at the Ede girl not as a girl, not as a human being who's been a victim of some fate, but as an object, an historical object, and we objectify her and use her, just as he does in the poem. If we look at the pattern of sounds in this stanza, Heaney's doing a number of things to contrast the short vowels and the long vowels as he does, but there are a number of other things that are going on here too. Notice the first two lines. Here is the girl's head, like an exhumed gourd, oval-faced, prune-skinned, prune-stones for teeth. You have the alliteration of the H on here and head that draw our attention to her and what she is, just ahead, just here. Here is the girl's head. Then the simile, like an exhumed gourd, slows it down, processes that, and we end with the two plosives, duh, punctuating it. The head, exhumed, gourd, they all end with the finality of that plosive. She's oval-faced, prune-skinned, prune-stones for teeth. start with, he tends to look at the brutality of things with short, clipped vowels. Here is the girl's head. E. Oval-faced, prune-skinned, prune-stones for teeth. As he reflects on it, the vowels stretch out. They become more contemplative. The long A, the long U, the long O, and her teeth. That is all she has. If you look at the next line, they unswaddled the wet fern of her hair. The rhythm slows down too. You have the short vowels, unswaddled the wet. Fern of her hair. Those long vowels change things. And if we look at the rhyming pattern, we see an I am on the wet, a crochet on fern of, and an I am on her hair. They unswaddled the wet fern of her hair. So the stresses are on wet, fern, hair. And that rhythm slows it down. And they made an exhibition of its coil. They made, processed, a long vowel, an exhibition of its coil. Again, each of the longer vowels forces us to slow down and contemplate her. Let the air at her leathery beauty, Pash of tallow, perishable treasure. Look at the contrast between the short vowels that are red here and the longer, slower vowels. Air, oo, e. You've got the repetition of the long e on leathery and beauty. You've also got in the next line, Pash of tallow, perishable treasure. You've got the consonants of the two p's and the two t's being harsh, but both of them end in the long vowels of tallow and treasure. Similarly, her broken nose with those long O's is contrasted with the dark clod. The plosives reversed there, dark clod. In the middle, you've got the turf, what she's become. And in the last line here, her eyeholes blank as pools in the old workings. Interestingly, the blank echoes the dark in terms of its harsh consonant. Similarly, at the end of the poem, Diodorus Siculus confessed. Some harsh consonant C's and the sibilants of the S create a bit of frisson there. His gradual ease among the likes of this. So that gentleness of the long vowels is contrasted with that final deictic pronoun with its short this. Not her, this. Murdered, forgotten, nameless, terrible, beheaded girl. Look at the constant use of plosives there and these stopped consonants ending with girl. So we look at her tenderly as a girl, a victim. Outstaring acts and beatification. Look at the complexity of that Latinate lexis there. All of those consonants treating her almost like the murdered, forgotten, terrible beheading in the past. To do something to her like that now is to transform her. And she outstares us, she resists it. And so the ending, the final word, which is so delicate and soft, reverence, is uneasy and full of tension as we question just what we're doing when we stare at a dead girl from the past. In the poem, which comes from the collection of North from 1975, Heaney is looking at the violence in society and how the dead are used, thought of, reflected upon. And whether that is from the cover we see the violent Viking imagery reflected in what we know of traditionally our views of Vikings, or whether it's in the violence that was erupted in civil protest on the streets of America, or the violence on the streets of Northern Ireland. Heaney is looking at what it is to take the victims of violence and reflect on them, and just how uneasy he does feel about that in one sense, and what we do when we discuss it or reflect on it in response. I think in the end Heaney has a far more sympathetic view of the dead girl as a girl rather than as an object or even the subject of his poem.